Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. From being a dark continent among continents, Africa is evolving into a region of hope with enormous resources that present growth opportunities not only to itself but also to the rest of the world. But the effects of widespread poverty and widening inequality ensures that Africa is a high-risk continent characterized by trade restrictions and weak institutions. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the challenges and prospects for intra-African trade following the recent agreement for a continental free trade area in Rwanda? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Nigeria's annual trade policy report is a publication of the Office for Trade Negotiations. The document identifies priorities in Nigeria's trade policy as it affects structural transformation.
Trade statistics show that for 3 quarters of 2017, both in export and export, South Africa remained Nigeria's major trading partner in Africa. Within ECOWAS, Cote d'Ivoire assumed the top position in terms of Nigeria's imports from ECOWAS, while Togo maintained top position in terms of Nigeria's exports to ECOWAS.
Nigeria hopes negotiations on the continental free trade area will be concluded before the year ends. It pledges commitments to ensuring greater integration in the ECOWAS region. The conversation here gives recommendations to African economies on priority areas for trade in a fast-changing global economy.
National competences, for example, in competitively producing a quality product or service is important. And secondly, the procedures of engagement in trade. You know, many of our countries have a very, very narrow sense of what trade is. It's basically who can find the cheapest import from China and make a profit selling it around the country. No country ever developed because of how much they import final consumer products. Countries develop because of importing capital goods, things you use in producing value, things that will make you have wealth created out of your trade.
Trade and investment underpins any economy. You cannot develop just in isolation within yourself. You should trade with your neighbors. You should welcome investment from near and far. That's what creates jobs. That's what drives innovation. That's what deepens and grows an economy. And those are the things we want.
This forum has in attendance participants from around the world. It hopes to boost linkages between investors and African policymakers for the continent's growth and development.
At the 18th extraordinary session of the African Union Summit recently held in Rwanda, 44 African countries signed up for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. 27 countries also signed a separate African Union protocol on free movement of people by providing for visa-free travel, the right of residency and the right of business or professional establishment for citizens between signatory countries. Joining me in the studio on Africa Today, I have Adeniyi Kunu, a researcher and a policy expert. On Skype, I have Nemeka Obiariri, financial analyst and investment banker. And also joining me from our Abuja studio is Dr. Olani Olatunji Nelson, a former senior trade advisor and Nigerian representative to the United Nations. Good to have you all on the program.
Thank you very much.
Yes, now let me begin with you now, Mr. Adeniyi Kunu. Now, we do not really understand what this continental free trade zone is about.
Yeah.
Enlighten us. What is the benefit to the average African?
Well, let me first of all go to the statistics to tell the world that intra-trade within Africa is less than 20%. And the reason for that is if we check the colonial history of the continent, the Balkanization, particularly the accord signed at more or less the ending era of the 19th century resulted in, more or less the sharing of Africa. So the colonial masters actually ensured that their interests remain protected so that the colonial territories remain faithful to it, such that the economic template that it gave to Africa is such that favors its cause. I also like to remind the listener here, and of course the viewers, that there was something called the Economic Partnership Agreements that were reverberating last year up until the early part of this year, where the European Union wanted, more or less like removal of the tariff. Let's also say again that the World Trade Organization brought Nigeria into its body in 1990, and we did little scrutiny to what actually, all the terms are about, unlike what we have now. Now, let me come to this period. By virtue of the paltry intra-continental trade amongst African countries, it seems to have become very imperative that Africa as a continent, particularly the countries, do business more with one another. And of course, the United Nations Economic, as I say, economic community or conference for Africa, as it were, actually has projected that between now and maybe 2052, we should have the intercontinental trade, particularly the intercontinental trade in Africa, move to well over 52%, which is a positive. But there's also something called the financial negative. If this particular trade commences within the next 2-3 years, because the 44 countries that signed are still going to look at it, subject it to their country's ratification. As a matter of fact, there's an intention to remove 90% of the tariffs that's for all the countries that agreed to sign. Then there are sensitive commodities that will be included much later.
All right.
Now, so the point remains that with all of this, the continent will lose, particularly these countries, in tariff over 4.1 or 4.6 billion.
So those are the statistical numbers of what we get to.
Yes, but of course it stands to gain in terms of welfare over time. Well over 60 to 40 billion US dollars. So in due course.
So in other words, we get to benefit as Africans. Okay, let me quickly bring in Nemeka rather onto this now. Tell me, what are your thoughts where 44 African countries signed this agreement, excluding Nigeria and South Africa?
It's long overdue. I've always believed that Africa will do better trade among themselves. Just like last week I mentioned, over 80% of trade and investment is outside African countries, not even among them. So basically what we expect is it will open the window, create a borderless trade and a trade exchange between amongst these 42 countries that signed this agreement. I've always advocated, for example, in West Africa, Nigeria happens to be the biggest country in South Africa. Population of West African economy, the population of the West Africa is about 600 million. Africa itself, we have 1 billion people live in Africa. Outside China and India, the largest population is in Africa. And we have the landmass. If you bring the US, bring Asia, and put them into the Africa, they would be swallowed up. Take, for instance, West Africa. I've always believed that one of the 3 key areas that we must address, the area of transportation, both air, sea, and land, among these nations. Take, for instance, from Nigeria to Senegal, we have over 448 nautical miles of coastal waters. We can actually create a coastline rail transport that passes through the coastal waters, crossing Lagos, Benin Republic, Togo, Ghana, all the way to Liberia, Sierra Leone, and even to Senegal. Trade among the African countries, trade and investment will help even boost and uplift the standard of living among the Africans.
Well, in this case, now Nigeria and South Africa, Nemeka, I'm sorry for cutting you here. Nigeria and South Africa are out of the equation here. What implications do you think that would be for this continental free trade?
It is very strange because Nigeria would have been one of the biggest beneficiaries if we had signed up to this. I give you an example. There is no let me give the example of the maritime sector. There is no transshipment port in the whole of Southern Africa. The nearest transshipment port is in Rotterdam. If Nigeria has signed up, take for instance maritime, Nigeria will have been a hub. We will have created a transshipment port through which other Sub-Saharan Africa, especially West Africa, will begin to clear their goods and take delivery of goods coming from either Europe, Asia, and other places.
Nigeria not being a signatory to this is not good. It does not bode well for us.
Okay.
We stand in the best place to benefit most from this.
All right, let me quickly get the thoughts of our guest who joins me from our Abuja studio. Olani, with what President Buhari said, he believes that Nigeria would not agree to, well, sign into anything that will undermine local manufacturers, that may lead to, and also may lead to Nigeria becoming a dumping ground for finished goods. Now, with what Nameka believes, it is going to be a plus for the Nigerian economy. What are your thoughts on what the presidency believes that this continental trade might be for the country instead?
Thank you so much, moderator. Once again, let me thank you for bringing me into your studio. But most importantly, what the president said was said out of the knowledge and understanding that when you want to measure growth, it must be homegrown growth that is supportive of our economy and all other indices that supports the nation called Nigeria. There is nothing compelling Nigeria to sign the Continental Free Trade Area at this time. If it has not taken, if the agreement had not taken into consideration all the necessary details that will ensure that Nigeria will be competitive at the free trade area. And for me, I feel it is never a bad idea signing this continental free trade area at this time.
Okay, let's quickly go on a quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we have been looking at the challenges and prospects for the intra-African trade following the recent agreement for the continental free trade area in Rwanda. Hello? Hello, Dr. Olani. Yes. I realized that you were breaking...
Hello, madam.
Yes, you were taking your time to, respond. I would advise that you just go on. I think maybe you're hearing yourself back. Just go on. Don't slow down or don't pause. Just go on. We're hearing you fine. It's a connection network.
Okay, the echo was actually...
Yes.
But, okay. All right.
Its historical role as Ghana's manufacturing, built in manufacturing.
In 2012, African heads of government agreed to establish a continental free trade area and began negotiations in 2015 together for 1.2 billion people with a combined gross domestic product of more than $2 trillion. The recently signed agreement commits to removing tariffs on 90% of goods, with 10% of sensitive items to be phased in later. Now, let's quickly look at this matter, Mr. Kunu. If with all these pluses here and there on what the continental free trade is really about, why is it that 10 countries, aside from Nigeria and South Africa, decides to pull out, knowing that it's going to be a big one for the Africans here?
There are always two sides to a coin, the one that you want the world to see and the one that you'd like them not to see. If you look at the competitive edge of the country, I'd have to say it is not the best at this times. A country of about, as of today, Nigeria's population stands at 195,800,000 plus as of today. It tells you that a country of that population, the biggest in Africa and the biggest in the black world, cannot generate 7,000 megawatts of electricity and expect to be competitive, because it's to be expected that when this agreement is signed, you begin to produce, you begin to create jobs. And if you look at it, if I refer to what Bill Gates said yesterday at the Executive Council meeting, where he actually gave his own speech, he said, we are building particularly physical infrastructures, but we're not developing human capital. Now, the next phase of the world, particularly globalization, will be needing a lot of skilled workers. You're talking about the country that has, more than half of its population being well below 30 or just above 30. So you're talking about considering your competitive edge. The only thing for me was that in that 2012, when this discussion started, Nigeria was actually at the fore of these negotiations. And do not also forget that at the turn of the millennium up till now, of all the investments that have come, foreign direct investors that have come to Africa, Nigeria has been the major beneficiary. So you're talking about the country that has the advantage of population, but a country that suffers in colossal terms the deficit, of course, of infrastructure. The country that appears not to know how to work things out, so much so that it would actually take advantage of its population. If you look at the United States of America, 300 plus population. If you look at China, over 1 billion. Look at India, over 1 billion. These countries have been able to leverage their population and have become hubs of investment.
So in other words, the people make the economy grow.
Most definitely.
Okay, Lafa, that's a very good one, if I would say. But if I want to come to you now, Mr. Nemeka, if you're to look at this matter from what the AU Trade Commissioner is saying, he is optimistic that other countries will come into the party, join the fray. So we'll definitely have all hands on board. But what do you think the AU need to do differently to convince other members that are yet to jump in the ship so that we can all go in the same train?
Statistics and the numbers show clearly that it will be beneficial for African countries to come together and trade amongst themselves. And I'm impressed with what the last speaker said. It's a tragedy of monumental proportion that a country as blessed as Nigeria is lagging behind in terms of infrastructure development. Take, for instance, that this country harbors the highest number of human capital in the whole of Africa. We have millions of Nigerians, hundreds of thousands of Nigerians in diaspora, skilled human capital, some of the best in the whole world. We have not been able to harness them because we've always ended up putting round pegs, mediocres, at centers of leadership. The only way we can get it right, just like he pointed out, is for us to start putting the right people in the right places. One of the greatest deficits that this country has is the deficit in leadership. From the federal to the state level, to the local government level, to all the arms and the levels of government, majorly we have people that have no business being in leadership, and it has to do with the warped structure of this federation, and which we need to get right. Nigeria should be at the forefront. Nigeria should have been the country at the forefront of integrating the rest of other African countries to harness the potentials in this country, in this continent. But the tragedy there is, instead of leading, Nigeria is lagging behind. Nigeria is not lagging behind because we are not blessed with the best of human capital. Nigeria is not lagging behind because we are not blessed of the best of resources. Nigeria is not lagging behind because we don't have the best of demographics. Nigeria is lagging behind because we have the poorest form of leadership at all levels and arms of governance, and which we must right. And the only way we must right it is for us to retool and restructure the whole physical, governance, political, and the socio-economic framework of Nigeria.
All right.
Back to what we used to have, those golden eras of 1960 to 1966.
All right.
Until we go back to those things that worked for us, putting in place the constitutional framework as we had it then, where every region grew at its own pace, having the best of human capital. People like Nnamdi Azikiwe, Awolowo, Tafawa Balewa, Michael Okpara leading, unlike what we have today. Mediocres at all centers of governance, who are just like blind men leading to eyed men. Okay,
let me quickly bring in Dr. Olaniyi here. Dr. Olaniyi, let's look at Africa in general as a continent. It is known to be a huge consumer of imported goods, and with this continental free trade, it's more about trading between member states. Now it's about showing who we are to ourselves. How can we close these gaps where we import goods from outside our shores if we intend to pursue this continental free trade that is to our benefit?
Thank you so much, moderator. Once again, I want to say to you that Nigeria's insistence of not signing continental free trade agreement at this time does not mean the country will not join the party at a later time. But the most important thing is that the country must get ready with massive consultations with key stakeholders that are active players within this free trade area. And if Nigeria at this time is saying they are not joining, I want to believe it's in view of considering the fact that issues of regional payment system where we do not have key integrated financial solutions, identifying convergence criteria for which our businesses interlocate themselves, promoting of our services and reorigination of licenses and federation of business associations. All these key areas are key to the implementation of the continental free trade areas. I think in Africa, it is high time for us to begin to realize that Africa does not trade among itself, and it's important for us to trade amongst ourselves. I agree that continental free trade area will promote intra-Africa trade, but that will be effective only when our productive capacity is shored up in order to be able to play regionally. And I want to believe also that, as it is also noted, that the issues of, for example, let me take it from West Africa here, where we have the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme. You tell me how many of Nigeria's local production qualifies into for the ECOWAS ETLS. So because of this, massive sensitization, educating the key stakeholders is very, very important first before we now begin to sign agreements that are binding.
Right. Okay, now if we're to look at this matter now, Mr. Kunu, what would be your what other challenges do you think lies ahead, even though we are yet to, get all members into the party?
Well, I think for us, it's 10 steps backwards, because when you don't do the things you should do right, it will come to haunt you. I believe that between 2012 and now, we're talking about 6 years, this is 2018, we would have reasoned enough to understand that certain loopholes must be blocked in terms of even pushing our commodities to the West African region. And perhaps one of the anomalies was to have a country like Morocco want to join the West African region when it is the faraway North Africa. That tells you that certain things didn't go down well within the regional bloc, such that Morocco insisted in perhaps coming into that party and becoming a lead player, which many people refuted. So I think at the moment, it may not be ideal for us to step backward. If there doesn't documentation we need to put, ink upon for us to get started, it is just that between now and the next 1-2 years, Nigeria has the opportunity to reconsider certain things that it has not done right. Let me tell you, within the past 1 year, Nigeria has less than 70 million bank account owners. Within the past 1 year, Nigeria has lost 1.5 million active accounts. That's less than 65 or less than 55 or thereabouts. So it tells you that that's a minus on the economy. So the first thing for the government to do, look at all the terms that you perhaps need to rework, and perhaps the areas where you have competitive edge. Ensure, don't forget, they will always come to Nigeria.
Right.
We have the population.
Indeed, we have the population. I'd like to thank you very much, Adeni Kunu, researcher, policy expert, for your contributions.
Thank you.
As well, I'd like to thank my other guests via Skype and from Abuja studio, Mr. Dr. Olani Olatunji Nelson, and of course, Nemeka Obiari Reef. Thank you very much for your contributions on Africa Today. For a continent with so much untapped potentials and unexplored opportunities, Africa is largely seen as a collection of nations who produce items they don't consume while consuming resources they don't produce. To turn things around for good, regional barriers must be removed to ensure the unrestricted movement of goods and people, allowing Africa to effectively and collectively trade herself out of poverty. And that is our package for today. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Mokwariola, and always remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.